Welcome to Scott Hall and to the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation. It's great to see so many of you here today. I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes at the very beginning, give you a few updates and some housekeeping. My name is Anna Siefken. I'm the Executive Director for the Scott Institute. I'm so glad that you're here today. Welcome to those of you who have not been in this space before. Is there anyone who has never been to a lecture in this space before? Quite a few of you. Welcome. Very, very glad to have you here. This is my contact information. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, that's a really good way of getting in touch with me. Over the next few weeks, as we're getting ready for Energy Week, there's a lot of activity that's happening, so we'll talk about that. So thank you very much again for coming to our event this morning. The purpose of the Scott Institute is to create opportunities through strategic partnerships, through education for students like this, through programming, et cetera. So very glad to have you here. You are in Scott Hall. This is a LEED Gold facility. We're very excited about all of the work that's happening here, not only from our key faculty, but the lab work, the nanotechnology lab, et cetera. So if you have not gotten a tour and would like one, please let us know. I will let you know that you are on the 5th floor right now. So it could be a little confusing, and apologies if it took you a few extra minutes to get here this morning. You were on the 5th floor, so in the case of any emergencies, and by the way, we have had an alarm in the past couple of weeks. So if there were to be an emergency, we would exit out of either this door or the other door, and we would head towards this corner, which is the 5th floor exit. It's the official entrance to the building, and we would meet outside on the green space. If you're looking for a restroom, the women's room is on this side of the hallway, and the men's is on that side. So please do come and go as you need to. This is a zero waste event. So the plate, the fork, the cup, and the food that you were given can all be put into the green lined bags. So if you brought anything with you that is not compostable, we have one trash can and that's it. So you'll have to look for it. I'm not exactly sure where it is. I think it's probably out by the door. It has a black bag. Otherwise, recyclable, compostable for everything that you have. So we have a couple of additional events that are coming up between now and Energy Week, which is at the end of March. So Diego Safaro is going to be speaking on, March the 3rd in this space. And so Diego, I think you're here in the audience. Is Diego here? I saw him a minute ago. So that's a lecture not to be missed. We also have Ann Choate, who is from ICF International, who will be giving a presentation on April the 15th. So in between those two dates, you'll notice we skipped Energy Week, which is March the 23rd through the 27th. We have 5 full days of programming. And so instead of going into any detail about that right now, I'm actually just going to drive you to the website. So cmuenergyweek.org is where you can register. It's a free event this year. And we do have any number of events that are happening. Many of you I see in the audience are participating, so thank you for that. So with that, I do want to introduce our special guest today. So Stephen Malnight is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Duquesne Light Holdings and Duquesne Light Company. He serves as the President and Chief Executive Officer. He's a leader in the transmission and distribution of electric energy to more than 500,000 customers in southwestern Pennsylvania, including downtown Pittsburgh. Prior to joining Duquesne Light, which how many months ago?
9 months.
9 months ago. He was Senior Vice President, Energy Supply and Policy for Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, in California, and the Pacific Gas and Electric Company. In his recent role, he oversaw the development and implementation of PG&E's energy strategy and policy at the national, state, and local levels. And he was responsible for the energy supply business, including generation and procurement, corporate sustainability and clean energy initiatives, external affairs, customer care, and information technology. And he holds a Master's in Business Administration from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth, and a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the University of Notre Dame. So with that, Steve Malnight.
Thank you. That all translates to I couldn't get into Carnegie Mellon, so it's great to be here, but it's definitely an intimidating crowd to come and talk to. As Anna said, I've been here in Pittsburgh only a short time. I spent 16 years in California where Anna kind of gave me the bio, but I'll just say throughout my 16 years there, I spent most of my time thinking about what does the future of the energy industry look like? What are the smart policies and technologies we should be deploying? How are things going to shape and change? And obviously in California, they had some other problems that sort of distracted them from that future. But when I looked at Pittsburgh and the opportunity to come here, one of the things that got me most excited about not only this company but this region is that here we sort of exist at this exciting middle ground between the old and the new, between old energy, between fossil energy and new innovative clean energy. We stand sort of at the crossroads of the past and the future. And I think here, between the great innovation engine that is Carnegie Mellon and all the thought leadership that spins out of the universities in our community, between a customer base that has demonstrated a desire to move forward and have some progressive thoughts on where we want to go, we have real opportunity here to kind of craft the future of the utility industry, the energy industry, and how we all use it. So I'm going to come today not to talk about mathematical modeling for shale gas deployment, which sounds really cool, but I can't do that. I'm just going to give you some of my thoughts and views on where I think the energy industry is going. And what I really hope to do is leave you with a couple of the problems that I see that as an industry we have to overcome in order to kind of build it right. Because let's be honest, you know what, we're going to build it as an industry. We're going to build an energy infrastructure that's going to power the future. The question is it going to be affordable and reliable for consumers? Is it going to be expensive and challenging? Are we going to build it twice, or are we only going to build it once? And I don't know about you, but I really think I'd rather have customers spend money on other things in their life than on delivering energy to their home. I'd rather find ways that we can deliver that reliability at a lower cost to society, because society's got plenty of other uses for its money. Let me start off. I mean, we talked a lot. I mean, everybody sort of has talked about the transition in the energy industry, right? Generation going from large plants to a bunch of distributed generation resources around. There still are those big plants too, though, right? So it's big and little. Markets are moving from sort of centralized regional markets to really decentralized and sort of hyper-local markets as a possibility for our future. Transmission, you know, really being based on how do I move power from a few big plants to sort of urban city centers, now to actually being resources to move power back and forth across city centers, across municipalities, across clusters of consumers. Distribution has been thrown up to the air, right? It used to just be going from a substation to homes. Now it's actually a potential transactive environment where consumers can push energy back and forward. And you have whole different models that could evolve. And what's driving it all, at the bottom, you've got customers who are looking at energy in completely different ways. And when we think about that, what's driving that change? It's a whole bunch of things. I sort of group them into these three big bubbles, right? You've got traditional goals. We've got to make sure we maintain reliability on the system. Performance of power plants and efficiency of capital deployment. You've got safety and public safety, lower costs. These are all traditional goals that utilities have worked on for a long time. But what's also changing? Environmental goals. We have different policy priorities as a society. We're focused on deploying clean energy. We're focused on enabling more competition and choice. That's presenting entirely new challenges to the energy system. But really, at the top is where I think the crux of our opportunity sits. And that's engaging consumers to the energy business and the energy industry in a way that they never have before. I mean, let's be honest. There was a McKinsey study, I think, at one point that said electric utility customers spent on average 4 minutes a year thinking about their electric utility. And it was the time it took them to write their check for their bill every month. And that was it. Nobody really wanted to think about it, right? Turn a switch on, the lights come on. When they don't come on, I'm not happy. I plug stuff in, there's always enough power for me, right? And that has a consequence across the whole system. Suddenly I can't engage consumers in how they use energy. I just have to model it and make an assumption so that I always have enough energy for them whenever they need it. No one calls ahead to ask for energy. Well, the consequence of that as you built out a system is you have to build excess capacity through the system. And then there was that challenge, that little pesky problem of I couldn't store energy. So I had to build a system that by virtually any other standard would look like it's a horrible utilization of capital, right? I mean, the capacity utilization of the electric system is so much lower than just about any other infrastructure system you would think about, because it had to be, because we valued reliability and we didn't have electric consumers engaged to energy, and we couldn't store the stuff, so we always had to have extra capacity available for consumers. These things change that game. They change all of those assumptions. They can change the way we think about and design a system going forward, but they also challenge those assumptions before we get to a new state, right? They challenge the existing state for how we use energy. How customers are using it, clearly, originally the system pretty much designed to light things up. Make sure the lights are always on, right? And that was a very predictable load because I knew when the sun was going to go down. When the sun goes down, the lighting load goes up. I can model it pretty easily. Suddenly you started seeing more solar deployment on our system. Well, that was interesting. It actually kind of coincided. When the sun was up, I didn't have an electric demand because of a lot of lighting. So it was generating electricity really when I didn't need it. That's an interesting dynamic that it presents to the system. So then you started seeing, well, maybe I can start deploying batteries or electric vehicles onto a system and somehow use that differently as the system operates. Now suddenly we're talking about a system here in our future that looks dramatically different than the way this system was built. And remember, this system was built 150 years ago. It's been built over time. It's been added to as it's grown. But suddenly we're looking to use the system very differently than we have in the past. And how does that play out? Well, you've probably seen this type of example all the time, right? Current power grid, one-way power flows. Big systems, big generating facilities where I can get really high capacity utilization. Nuclear power plants, great example. Turn them on, never turn them off. Just let them keep running for a long time. I'm going to solve the incremental gaps with a little bit of extra energy that I generate, when I need it most. But generally, big plants transmitted through a big system to a consumer that frankly might as well have just been thought of as a meter, right? I didn't even know what was happening on the other side of that meter, but it was a meter. Now, the other side from a consumer perspective, using energy very differently, pushing it back onto the system. How does that distribution system operate now? It's actually transmitting power between users, not just to a user anymore. Very different challenge for the system. So let's think about the load curve. As I said, remember, used to be really predictable. The power was going to be needed when the lights came on, right? Later in the day, as the sun went down, load's going up, it's coming in the morning. I build that system. I have nuclear power plants and big coal plants or big gas plants that run all the time. I use gas or some other incremental thing, the peakers, to ramp up in the middle of the day. What happens when you see all that solar come on, as I talked about? Suddenly you're getting generation when you really don't need it, and it's not actually helping you in the afternoons when you're consuming that energy. I got solar coming out here, and I have to solve really big ramps. California. Man, what a crazy situation California was. I started working on renewable policy in California in 2007 and 8 as California was trying to achieve 20% renewables. And everybody thought, man, I don't even know if this is possible. I don't even know if we can get there. All the utilities thought, this is crazy. Can't operate a system with that much intermittent resource on it. Well, you can. It just creates a whole new set of problems that you have to work on, and suddenly storage becomes a great resource. But I want to posit a different future and ask the question, what would it take for us to get there? Because the fact is, this system here is actually worse than this one on capacity deployment, on capacity utilization. Think about how much we invest in the system to build an electric grid to operate this way. And now, what did I do? I deployed a bunch of capital to build a bunch of solar projects, and I have to deploy a bunch of batteries, and I still need all those peakers and all that other stuff, right? We're actually kind of going backwards. We're achieving good goals on our environmental performance. We're cleaning up the system, but we're going backwards on the core question of, are we utilizing these assets better for our consumers? And remember, capacity utilization translates to cost. Are customers getting cheaper energy delivery over time, or is it more expensive? Solar got cheaper than a lot of other resources. That's great, but that's only one component. The cost of all that grid requirement to get it there, that was going up. So what's that future look like? What if we actually can engage consumers to load? We break down that barrier of storing energy. It becomes cheaper. Now I have the opportunity to flatten out the load curve. And in flattening the load curve, this has been the challenge we've looked at for 30 years. I mean, California's talking demand response 30, 40 years. We've always had this dream of flattening the load curve, but it's been too expensive. It's been cheaper just to build out that system. How do we drive the cost down to achieve a flatter load curve? Because when we do that, again, better capacity utilization on the system, everybody pays a lower price. What's it going to take to get there? Well, storage. Got to get there on lower cost. We're on the road. We're on the way there. But here's the challenge. How do you use that storage? Where is it located? How do you use the solar generation in the middle of the day? Where is it located? How do I optimize the use of those resources? What we face now is a much more complicated formula in how to operate the system. And that's what I want to talk about. So what's the grid have to start to look like? How does our energy system have to evolve? Think about it this way, over time, and think about the deployment of distributed resources, solar, electric vehicles, storage, whatever it might be. The more we get of that over time. In the beginning, we have relatively low DER adoption. This is the reality of Pennsylvania today. We have pretty low solar adoption in Pennsylvania. Electric vehicles are really just starting to come. There's really virtually no distributed solar in California. So what's our challenge? We've got to really replace an aging infrastructure. Again, built 150 years ago. You still now have the two-way power flows and other things we have to deal with. You've got to modernize this infrastructure and put on capabilities and technologies on the grid that give you visibility and control. You know, the interesting little secret of the electric grid, it was basically built to operate without much visibility and control to what's actually happening out there in the system. It was built so that I didn't need sensors at individual homes. I didn't need to know how much individual consumer was using at any given time. The system was built to deliver it in a dumb way. It didn't need to be smart. As you start to see these DRs deployed, you've got to have intelligence on the system to know what's going on, because suddenly you can't model it anymore, right? What happens as DER deployment keeps coming and growing? Well, suddenly that intelligence isn't enough. Now you actually have to integrate those resources and optimize them in some way. You might have too much solar on one circuit. If every consumer in that neighborhood has put solar on their rooftop, you're going to have on a big sunny day in the middle of the day when all of them are at work, you're going to have a big energy pushing back onto the system. The system either might not be able to take that energy back, or it might just be better to turn that solar down a little bit. It's cheaper for us to turn that solar down than to build a system to pull it all back in any given moment. So suddenly now I start to think about, how do I build an ability to optimize that platform? How do I think differently as a utility about operating this system in an optimization way versus just pushing power out and kind of letting consumers use it as they see fit? As it gets even more DER deployment, that alone isn't enough either. Because now you need to start providing a value for different resources at different locations. You need to be able to start to provide a value to that individual consumer who's generating solar, and maybe say, I need to charge you to store that energy at a different time based on how the home next to you is generating energy as well. Which one of you would rather turn it down? I'll pay you to turn it down. Which one is it? I can create markets that can better optimize the utilization of those resources. But to get there, you have to have complete control to turn it up and down. This is happening at timescales that are not by individual choice anymore. They have to be completely automated so that they can optimize with each other. That grid, that electric grid, looks really different than the grid we talked about down here. Really different. And we have to think about, frankly, it doesn't exist anywhere. California, I would argue, is starting to kind of creep into this zone. They're struggling because they got deployment faster than they got capability on the grid. Hawaii, Australia, those kinds of markets are clearly up in this zone, but everybody's struggling because they haven't built the system to operate with that high level of penetration. They're kind of doing the things they can to keep the system operating, but no one's really figured this completely out yet. And this is just an idea. It's an idea that people are starting to bat around, and I think if we want to get ahead, we've got to get there. So that's our challenge. Sorry, these all came in different order. It's all right. So I'm going to skip that slide. Let's talk about one key resource and why this is presenting some of the challenges it does. So let's talk about electric vehicles for a second. I will tell you, I mean, I'm a big believer that as a society, we have to immediately and imminently grapple with the challenges of climate change. We have to deal with our carbon emissions as a society. We cannot possibly get there without addressing our transportation sector. We have to see a significant electrification of our transportation sector to get there. The good news is, as I remind everybody, plugs are more ubiquitous than gas stations. There is a system here that's ready to fuel the transportation infrastructure, and we have the time and the ability to prepare for it. The technology is all there, the vehicles are there, the storage is there. Our future is clear, we just have to get ahead of it. But now let's start to think about what does it look like as we start to deploy charging. We can deploy charging and electric vehicles in a way that is completely disaggregated from the electric system, right? We could just say individual consumers can do whatever they choose to do. We'll locate charging wherever someone's willing to pay for it. We'll connect you to the system. We'll build the system as we usually do, as if it was a light bulb. We'll try and predict your use, and we'll build so we always make sure we have excess capacity. What happens to the electric load? Suddenly everybody comes home, they plug in at night, and we see a significant increase in that peak load. We made our problem worse again, especially in a world where you got solar deploying in the middle of the day, and now you got charging coming in at night. You're significantly aggravating that problem of what do we do. How do we fix that problem in advance while solving for some of those challenges that I mentioned before? Electric vehicles are a phenomenal resource. It's a mobile battery pack. Consumer behaviors around driving are forecastable and predictable. When you charge is very controllable. Where you charge is controllable. The ability for us to model our system, I was just talking with one of the professors here about deploying charging and how you model charging. Well, we can model where charging should go based on consumer behavior, where they drive, the charging capacity of vehicles. We can model all that. But how about we also model it based on the ability for these vehicles to provide value to the grid? Where can their smart charging drive value on the grid side? Now we're collapsing those two sort of infrastructure systems together. We have to model them together in an integrated way. But if we do that, we can completely change this challenge and maybe even solve the challenges from earlier. So how do we integrate these vehicles? So what is the challenge that stands in our way as an industry? What do we have to solve? Because I want to leave you guys with some of the things that I worry about from our industry perspective, because I know all the smart people in here are probably going to be able to solve all these problems and more. There's two big problems that I want to leave for you today. First is grid visibility. And by grid visibility, I mean the ability for the system to see grid condition in real time, because the pace of the electric system operates in hertz, not in seconds or even minutes or anything else. It operates in hertz cycles, right? We have to have visibility to what the condition of the grid looks like in real time. You have to know, how is this home behaving in real time? Because no one wants to be the home that, we just ignore and the rest of the circuit's fine, but that home isn't, right? So the granularity and scale has to be much higher. Now, here's the problem, right? Like, this is sort of a good depiction from a utility perspective. We look at distribution service territories. We can maybe get it down to planning areas. We start to look at substations. We look at feeders. That's the language of utilities. But as you start to go down to, I need to be able to see the distribution transformer, and I need to see the individual customer, things get really blurry. Because we're talking about now hundreds of thousands and millions of points versus thousands of points. How the utility can see that in real time, how the system operator can see it and understand it in real time is a significant issue. So the edge of the grid is where our challenge is. Now, it's not really, we've built out a system that goes to the edge, obviously. We have advanced smart meters, right? Those are built as think of them as like the cash register, right? That's the meter that meters usage. We have to transform that data point into actually a grid condition monitoring device, not just a meter that collects usage and that we bill off of. Why does it really matter? This is the key thing, right? Why does it matter? Because that's where the DERs are. We have to take the grid edge, and that's where we have to operate from, versus operating from the center of our system. So this is a big challenge for us. Remember what I told you earlier, the system wasn't built for this. It was built for that kind of level of thinking. It's not built for this level of thinking. It's not just about sensing and data technology, it's about what do you do with that data. When utilities, I'll tell you a funny story. So when I was at PG&E, PG&E was one of the first utilities in the country to deploy smart meters. So we deployed 5 million smart meters back in like 2004, I think, or 5. And I was in a job running our demand side management programs, and I was trying to help consumers take advantage of things like AC cycling programs for demand response. And I said, we know all the smart meter data. We should be able to figure out who's actually using power during times when the grid needs the demand response, right? Because at the time, we would just send out mailers by zip code. So everybody in the zip code gets this mailer, join this program. We can do better, right? We have the data. Why don't we dive in and understand who's using energy in those moments when the grid needs it? And maybe even better, let's really parse the data and figure out who actually has an air conditioner that is running in those moments when the grid most needs it. And the answer I got was, we can't get access to that smart meter data. The utility didn't know how to deal with that much data. They never built the capacity for that. The idea was smart meters go into the billing system. They don't become an analytics tool that helps you understand how your grid's operating and how you can target consumers' behavior. So many utilities, fortunately, that was in 2004. We've all gotten better. We've all gotten a lot better. But that evolution of thinking of not only having visibility to the grid edge, but how do I use it and what do I do with it is a significant change. Not a big change for you guys. Not a big change or a hard problem when you think about the problems you're working on, but you can help this industry understand how do we take the data that's available at the grid edge and actually know what to do with it and how to do something great with it. Why is it also important, right? Remember, we talked about this a little bit ago. You build a nice system that says, here, I got my substation, it's going to homes, very predictable, modelable behavior, the flow goes one way, very simple equations, which the electrical engineers in the room will know inside and out on how to solve that problem. Well, in a different world, where maybe they don't just have a hairdryer that I can model pretty easily, but now they start to have vehicles and solar and storage, that load's flowing backwards, and all of the models that predict what happens in that environment get much more complicated. So I need the visibility at the grid so I know what's happening here so I can model it back through the system and do something with it through those equations, which are much harder but probably very easy for you guys because you're studying them already. What do you do, though, with that data? Here's the second big challenge that I think the grid has and our industry has that you guys can easily solve. It's power system intelligence. It's truly bringing intelligence to that grid, because once you have all that data and you bring all that back and you have visibility to it, the problem that we face is this grid operates in cycles. It operates at a pace of change that only an intelligent system could actually optimize. So how do we build that kind of intelligence into the system? It really, the things I looked at, right, when I was looking at smart meter data, more just like descriptive analytics. How do people use it in the past and what do I do with it? That's great, useful, interesting. I tried to pull some insights out of it. Here are the people who actually, are going to use this technology, but value here, this pales in comparison to what we could do if we get up here to foresight. If we get to the place where we can truly model and predict the system and how it's going to operate with all of those millions now of distributed resources, with those batteries that move, because cars are going to drive around based on individual consumer behavior, the challenge from a computing and from an intelligent system is going from sort of few to a few to many in a way that multiplies exponentially, and that the utility today doesn't have the ability to operate the system that way. So this is, I think, a challenge that our industry is going to struggle with. How do we bring the intelligence, the AI, the computer, machine learning, the things you guys are studying every day to solve these problems, to be able to optimize the system across those thousands and thousands of resources? Very solvable problem with the folks in this room, with the research and the work you guys are doing. Not solvable just within Duquesne Light Company. We have some really smart people in our company. Some of them came from where you guys are. But this is going to require many more of us to work together. And when you think about, now the slide I didn't show you from before, the challenge that we have is not just the electric system and how the electric system is going to be optimized and worked over time. Because remember, we're going to deploy electric transportation. That's going to probably end up being significantly autonomous with a communications layer that is extremely important to be able to optimize those systems. All three of those infrastructure systems have to collapse together and be optimized together. So how do we make sure that we have not only the electric system with the capability to charge those vehicles, but how do we make sure the transportation system is built to optimize where those vehicles are moving in alignment with where they're going to charge? How do we have the communications infrastructure so that they can communicate at very high levels with each other and optimize their flow, send that information back, learn, send that information back to the electric system to know when they're going to be there and what we need to do from a charge perspective? These infrastructures all have to collapse together. And that's a really exciting challenge for me. I love infrastructure businesses. I love what we get to do. And I wanted to sort of end with this slide, because no matter what we think about the really cool and interesting things we can study and the challenges we have in front of us, we also can't forget that this system was built for a really important purpose. It was built to light a light bulb. Yes, a really old light bulb. That's what it was built for. Kind of nice. It's a nice picture, right? But I kind of like an LED better myself. But it was built for this one. It wasn't built for that one. It was built for this light bulb. And no matter what, as we go forward, we can't lose sight of the fact that it can never fail to deliver that. The infrastructure requirement of our electric system is what powers society today. We can go think about all sorts of interesting things to try and play with and experiment with and explore, but this system can't go down, ever. Because when it does, everything stops. So that level of reliability, that level of dependability, that level of customer engagement so that we can power society is a thing we can never lose sight of in our electric system as we go forward. So as we build for the future, we can't forget the past is our sort of reason for existence. Lighting the lights, powering society, powering businesses, powering this institution so that you guys can go do great things in our society. This is kind of what got me so excited to become part of the electric industry, because I do think I love that foundational level of work that we do. So please help us as you guys are doing your work to think about how we never lose sight of this, but actually build something for a really exciting future. And with that, I'm looking forward to maybe some questions. I'm going to leave the cool picture up there so we never forget.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much. Yeah. Do we have questions?
My question is always related to what we do here in relation to the world, and what we do here in relation to our nature.
Okay.
And when you pointed out these lights, if we turned them off, we would all be able to communicate and wouldn't have these lights on because we have daylight. Mm-hmm. And so the point is, how do we collaborate, for instance, with China or India or Africa or places where they have no electricity yet? And so what would Duquesne Light do in relation to this global relationship? Because we have students from all over the world. And if they see this, they cannot imagine the future in a different way.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I'm an absolute believer that one of the foundational elements for us as we go forward in our future is how do we think about using energy most efficiently and effectively. I've been doing energy efficiency programs my entire the entire time I've been in the energy industry, and it is a core foundation. And I will admit, there's so much more that's available to us with building automation. There is no reason why lights should be on when we can harvest daylight. There's no reason lights should be on when no one's there. That transition has been more challenging than it should be. I think from the electric industry's perspective, part of our goal is ensuring that we provide good incentives to consumers, to customers as you're building new buildings and other things. We've got what I think are some good, solid energy efficiency programs here in Pennsylvania. Nothing like they were in California or in some other leading states that can do much more. But I do agree, we've got to start by how do we use energy most efficiently. It's the most efficient way to not use it than it is to generate it. So I agree, we've got a long way to go.
Other questions?
So coming from California, what are some of the lessons that now you're coming to PJM territory, and it's innovative in some ways, but also lagging in many ways. So what are some of those lessons that you really want to bring and demonstrate in this new, completely geographically different area of the nation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the interesting things that I sort of took out of California in terms of like the wholesale market dynamic, as I said earlier, I think California saw phenomenal success deploying solar. They never picked that technology overtly. They just pushed for renewables very quickly, and it was the lowest risk, cheapest source to build. But I would think everybody would agree that was not the optimum utilization of resources that was built out in California. There's way too much solar versus other resources there. There's more wind to get, there's more geothermal, we've got to figure out wave energy, we've got to figure out all these other diverse technologies before we just push into one. I think part of that dynamic was a policy objective that was just designed around the most kilowatt hours possible versus kilowatt hours at the right time, at the right place, of the right quality. So that challenge has just now presented another challenge to them, and they just are putting out incentives to go build storage. They're not using market dynamics to build storage. Generally, they're just saying, I'm going to put a mandate out and go build more storage. So I don't have the perfect answer for PJM, but I think one of the things we have to grapple with is the effectiveness of blunt instrument policy objectives versus how do you get the market structured in a way that it can help to balance out some of those conflicting priorities as we're building out a cleaner energy system. And I think there's a lot to learn from California. The other thing that's great is, they built so much of it that everything got super cheap. So that's great. Now we can start to take advantage of that here because, trust me, I signed some solar energy contracts that I'm ashamed to admit how much we paid for solar energy back in 2008 as it was getting deployed. So.
Hi, thank you for coming. A very interesting talk. My name is Dave Dzonpak. I'm head of civil and environmental engineering. We're in the infrastructure business in my department also. The wildfire risk in California is driving so much.
Geez, I thought I was going to go to my first talk about and not get a question about wildfire, but okay, come on.
It's driving infrastructure change.
Yes.
And now, my question is that going to be wholly unique to California, or will the technology, the approaches that are developed there, translate to other areas of the country, even where we don't have that kind of wildfire risk?
Yeah, and I mean, I will say California is on the leading edge of dealing with the climate change that we're all going to be grappling with. It's shocking to see really what happened in California from a wildfire risk perspective. Here's a statistic I usually mention. PG&E historically, wildfire risk in California was always a Southern California problem. It was always a San Diego kind of problem because the reason was during the dry season, in Southern California they got Santa Ana winds. So it's dry and it's windy. That's what creates wildfire risk. In Northern California, historically and virtually for a long time, the major wildfire risk happened in the brief respites between rain when wind hit as well, but it was brief respites. October and November in Northern California used to see quite a bit of rain. The last 6-7 years, the patterns have completely changed. And now they're getting into December and even into January before they see their first rainfall after 8 months of virtually no rain. and they're still seeing the wind patterns. So PG&E's territory went from 15%, which was considered high fire risk, to 50% high fire risk. And when you consider that they have 70,000 miles of infrastructure that were built, that is a lot of infrastructure that was built for a completely different climate condition than the one it operates in today. So how do we think about, frankly for all of us, how do we build more robust, more resilient, safer infrastructure even when you don't think you need it? Because as the climate changes around it, it's going to have to be ready to adapt to a very different climate. I think that one of the things we're going to see a lot of study on in California is microgrids and grid sectionalization. Now, microgrids is an interesting term to me because really microgrids is grid sectionalization. It's not people building completely independent grids. It's how do you take what today is a very big system that's highly integrated and provide the ability to sectionalize it with its own generation resources and containment so that you can eliminate power going through the higher risk zones, or in the situation where you've already had some kind of a climate effect like a major storm or landslides or flooding or something else, the system can be resilient to losing pieces of infrastructure. I think California is going to really push the way on that. The condition they have out there now where they're facing this choice of turning millions of people off or having high fire threat risk is unsustainable, and societally is unsustainable. But it's going to take some time to rebuild that system to get there. And I think they're going to push. And trust me, I know I hear a lot from folks in California. They are pushing literally as fast as they can hire people to do it. But it's a huge infrastructure rebuild challenge. So I think we're going to learn a lot from them. Our risks here are very different. I mean, I got to tell you, when I first moved here, I moved and I looked around and I saw these trees and I thought, oh my God, this is just like a fire risk everywhere. And I was kind of conditioned to have an adverse effect to trees. But it rains here all the time, like all the time. So we don't face a wildfire threat. We could face significant threats from significant hurricanes and storms that come much further east than they have because they're more powerful. They get further north than the system was built for. We have landslides all the time. We have flooding all the time. These are going to be our challenges. But everyone's going to face them in some degree.
So back here. I saw a question in the back. Raise your hand again. Okay.
Hi, thank you. My name's Matt Mahoney. I work with the Keystone Energy Efficiency Alliance, and we pay a lot of attention to Act 129, and we know that Act 129 is reaching the end of its current phase, where light bulbs were really highly prioritized by utilities. I'm wondering what you see as what the next phase of Act 129 and energy efficiency resource standards really for the state of Pennsylvania looks like.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we're still sort of working on the market dynamic, and frankly, we're not going to be the one to decide that on our own. I think we as an industry need to kind of work together on where is the real opportunity to get that next margin of energy efficiency. What I tend to look for and what I think we should be spending customer dollars on are where do we have proven technology that's available to consumers now, but that is sort of in need of that extra juice to get it to a level of deployment that it can't get to otherwise. I think that's where we get the biggest bang for our buck. Places where we can get real energy savings today with proven technologies. I think there's a lot of opportunities out there to continue to do that. We're going to always struggle with, with our building stock. Frankly, how do you drive efficiency in existing building stock? How do you continue to push that forward? That is where we need those programs to help move the needle. So we're still working on it. I'd love to hear your ideas on where we can do more with it, but no matter what, I see energy efficiency as just a critical resource for us as we continue to go forward.
We have a question over here, and then
Hi, I'm Reed McManigal. I work in the tech transfer office here and help our inventors who are interested in forming startup companies. So
keep them coming. Come on.
I'm curious what your mechanisms are to work on innovative technologies. Like, how do you test out things without risking the reliability of your systems?
Yeah, and I will tell you, one of the things we're working on, our grid and our system here in Pittsburgh and the technology deployed in our system probably lags a little bit behind other parts of the country in terms of its modernization. Part of it is because ours is older than most systems. Many systems actually are. I remember when I got here, Somebody was telling me a story about, pulling like Westinghouse Unit 1 out of service in Duquesne Light, and that wasn't that long ago. So, we have an aged infrastructure here, just like we do everywhere else. We've been really focused on sort of updating and modernizing that infrastructure for the usage patterns of today. And we have deployed smart meters across our whole system, and we have a lot of operational control in our system, more so than many other utilities do. We've deployed a lot of SCADA across our system, but we have a work to continue to push on from a monitoring so we can really see the whole system, as I talked about before. So we don't always have the most robust grid to directly plug it in. Now, I will tell you, when it comes to things like distributed resources, the grid is very robust. So we can continue to test new technologies. I think one of the bigger challenges for us is actually not just testing the technology and its link to the grid, it's testing the technology, customers' utilization of it, and the link to the grid, and how you bring those three together. And we are absolutely game to do that and to continue to push forward on those kinds of programs. We're pushing forward on electric vehicle programs and trying to understand how we can help customers adopt more and what we can do. So we have within our team, we're actually just building an office of innovation within our team to look at where are those technologies we should be focused on that can help transform the way we operate. I'm here today because we have a partnership with Carnegie Mellon that we want to continue to deepen and advance to look at those opportunities. It would be my goal that all of those great innovators who are spinning out projects and companies out of Carnegie Mellon come to us to say, how do we test it with you? How do we find a way to test it with you? And if we can't do it, then we'll help find somebody who can. But I want to see those technologies move forward because that's the stuff that's going to actually solve those problems for our industry. So you can call me. That's an answer.
Your last comments actually anticipated my question, which was your thoughts about how you might be working with CMU and Pitt, and how the two universities could be most helpful to Duquesne Light.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, Pittsburgh just has such an incredible resource in the universities here. Carnegie Mellon and Pitt, both in our space, in the engineering space, in the grid technology space, have so much to offer our industry. We do work with both universities. And I think, you've got the Energy Innovation Center that Pitt's sort of helped to kind of foster in their grid research center. We've done some work with them. And as I said, we're trying to continue to deepen our exploration with Carnegie Mellon. I think a big part of what we want to try and do is provide some transparency and visibility to the key challenges that our business faces. And then let great minds at the universities here figure out how we can help work together to solve them. Because if I knew the answer, I wouldn't need you smart guys. But I think I know what some of the challenges and problems are. So that's kind of the kinds of things we've been talking a lot about. What are some of the problems and challenges we face?
Okay. Hi. Could you talk about Duquesne's plans to transition to cleaner sources of energy for their customers?
Yeah, so Duquesne Light as a company, it's interesting, very different than what I experienced in California, because in Pennsylvania, we have a deregulated state, so we don't actually generate electricity anymore, and we only procure energy for what are called polar customers, for those customers who don't otherwise make a choice. Today, the nice thing is in Pennsylvania, we have the ability for consumers to choose 100% clean energy solutions from different competitive retailers, and that's a phenomenal opportunity to have here. When consumers don't make a choice, then we procure resources on their behalf in the market, and we procure them in compliance with the state's alternative renewable energy standard. So we buy, clean energy up to those standards. Now, I actually think there's opportunity in a space for us to do more in that front. One of the things we want to look at is how do we help drive community solar adoption across the territory. We have a bill that we're sponsoring in Harrisburg called PA Local Solar that would create a framework where developers could build community-sited solar resources and sell those direct to consumers. That's one thing I think we can do. The other thing is, as Pennsylvania looks to think about how do we deploy more clean and sustainable resources on the overall energy system, we have a lot of buying power. 70% of our consumers 70% of residential customers in our territory are on that polar service. They've not made another choice. So that's a great resource. That's a lot of energy we procure. And I'd love for us to find ways, we have to get permission sort of from Harrisburg and from the commission to use that buying power to drive lower cost solar energy and other renewable resources in our state. So we're working on that as well. The biggest thing, frankly, though, that I view that we can do is make sure that when consumers want to hook up solar to their home or connect an electric vehicle or put storage in their home, that we're always there and ready to serve them. And that's our big job, is to make sure we enable customers to make those choices and help them see that as a possibility that they can take advantage of.
So other than maybe the number of trees or amount of water in the region, has there been anything particularly surprising or unexpected during your 9 months here in the region, either related to energy or even more generally?
Yeah. Well, so I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Michigan. I've kind of lived all over. I lived in eastern Pennsylvania at one point in time in my life as well. So I've been in California a while, but I'm not from there. And I've kind of lived in all different parts of this country. A couple things I think that are particularly interesting to me here. The people here are incredibly nice, welcoming, friendly, and collaborative. It's a great culture that for those of you who are not from here, you probably see it as well. But for those of you who've lived in Pittsburgh your whole life, you have no idea what an incredible resource you have here in the great community that is Pittsburgh. I also think that, as I started off by talking about, one of the things that appealed to me is that things here, because we exist at sort of this crossroads here, past and present, fossil fuels to sustainable resources. Frankly, there are Republicans and Democrats in this region. We have to find solutions that fit in the middle, that can bring people together around different solutions. I used to joke when I was in California, if I went and said, hey, I got an idea to create electric vehicles, people would push $500 million my way. But here, we have to really work, we have to do the hard work of bringing people together around solutions, doing the hard work of the math and the study behind it to make sure we're making those right choices. And I think actually that gives us the opportunity to come up with better answers. By finding things in the middle, it gives us the opportunity to find better answers that are more sustainable and that can be more replicated and copied in other regions. I always say I don't think the solutions are going to come from California. I think we're all going to take advantage of lower costs from California. That's great. I don't think the solutions are going to come from California. I think the solutions can come from a place like Pittsburgh.
So I think we'd like to, there's a couple of student questions. I'm going to get some students in the back.
I'm a student. Good.
I'm actually not a student. So my name is Hashim. So I work with a startup called Switch Source. We make power electronics for the distribution system for reliability and hosting capacity. My question is in relation to the utility business model. Is it important for utilities in collaboration with the PUC to change their business models to advance new technologies, and how do we achieve that?
Yes, I think that our business model does need to evolve. I think that the business model of utilities generally was premised on the idea of an expanding grid, expanding utilization of the grid as measured by kilowatt hours. The world we're moving into is a much more complicated world that does require a different way of thinking about the business model for utilities. I think that what we have to have is we have to provide the incentives to attract the capital to invest in the system, to provide the reliability and the safety that our society demands. We also have to be able to present a certain enough and a safe enough environment for those investments that we can do it at a low cost of capital, because that's what drives affordability for consumers over time. So that safety and reliability and affordability are things we can't give up on, but the model is going to have to change over time. Charging people per kilowatt hour of electricity doesn't make sense in a model like I talked about before. The idea of the net zero home. Let's talk about that for a second. The net zero home, right? It can be net zero. It is a much heavier grid user than a home that only takes power off the grid. We have to provide even more services, capacity, capital, products and services to that consumer than if you just take the power off the grid. That's going to have to change. Now that's, of course, I think we could all probably agree on the end state. It's getting there that's really, really hard because there's lots of embedded interests. There's business interests from the utilities and from companies that sort of take advantage of the business model of utilities today. There's consumers who don't like the idea of changing the way they pay for energy, because some are going to win and some are going to lose in that sort of deal. So from my perspective, yes, it has to change, and the only way we're going to figure that out is by coming together and modeling out a view towards where the future is going to be, and bringing people of very divergent interests together, all with a commitment to sacrifice a little and to solve this problem. And I will tell you, that is probably far harder than any of the technology problems I've laid out for you today. I mean, orders of magnitude harder. Every time it's been tried, it's failed. Every time it's tried, it's sort of the battling wills between utilities and solar companies or somebody else. That's not going to get us anywhere good in the future. So yes, it's going to change. It's going to require all of us, and it's going to be really hard.
Am I not allowed because I'm not a student?
You can ask a question. We have a lot of people who haven't asked a question, though, that are behind you.
Okay.
That's why I keep running
I don't
to
see
them.
them because
Here we go.
I don't have eyes in my back.
Can you talk a little bit about how to engage customers? Right now, customers turn the switch on and write a check to you.
Yeah.
But you need them in
Yeah.
order to reduce demand and to deploy these new technologies. How are you going to engage them?
So first, it starts by knowing them better. The fact is, not all customers are going to want to engage, but some are going to be very willing and are going to want to. So you got to know them better. You have to start to disaggregate our customers and understand what drives their individual interests and desires. This is not new, right? I mean, Amazon knows more about you than anybody else in the world, I think, because of your buying habits, right? We can follow a pathway that doesn't have to go anywhere near that far to understand our customers better. And then the second is really understanding the technology that's available, because consumer interests are only enabled by technology. So how do we get, understand the technology that's coming, help direct it against those consumer needs, and marry the two up? That's going to be the way we're going to do it. And it's sort of a good model that's been blazed by retail and other industries before. We just have to get much better at it as an industry. And I think the electric utility industry has really started to make a big transition there. You know, it was not known as a consumer-friendly industry, but I think we're making some significant strides.
So we have a question back here.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Becca Gillespie.
Hi.
I work in energy storage.
Thank you.
One interesting kind of way to incentivize distributed energy resources without actually asking people to pay more is that they're using a lot in New York these days is non-wires alternatives.
Yep.
I'm curious, I know there's not a lot of growing infrastructure opportunities here because the load isn't really growing. I'm curious if Duquesne Light has considered something like that to meet the many challenges you have where you don't want to pay for it, but you want to incentivize DERs. Or if you have something similar that would work in a place without a growing load.
Yeah, I mean, we have been looking, and I'll tell you this, so far the sweet spot for non-wires alternatives is either in places where the cost of traditional infrastructure is extremely high, like New York and Brooklyn and those kinds of places where land is so valuable, or where you got a lot of growth because you're building out new infrastructure. We did some really cool stuff in California looking at some transmission alternatives that kind of fit both of those factors. There's not, on first blush, there's not a tremendous amount of opportunity for those two to exist here in our service territory. But I'm not giving up on that. And I think we can continue to look for maybe chunks and pieces where we have reliability issues or we have end of circuit issues. I think there may be some opportunities for us in some of those kinds of places. And we're going to continue to look because I'd really love to deploy some to learn, to try them out and to learn and to continue to get better. But we haven't found the sweet spot quite yet.
Yeah.
Good question.
My question is always quick. Anyway, my point is, how could we collaborate with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah.
And when that comes to China, I work also with Qingdao. And just to give you an example, Qingdao has attracted 1.36 billion euros from German industries in order to make infrastructures, mobility, water, sewage, energy, and so on, future-oriented. But this is a systems integration thing.
Yeah.
This doesn't have to just do with electric generation and distribution, but with electric use, but also how it relates to the infrastructure and mobility sewage, water, and other kinds of treatments.
Well, I do think, I mean, we're pretty blessed in Pittsburgh. I think we've got a lot of good leadership from the mayor and from this community on the UN sustainability goals. I actually chair two committees. I chair a sustainability committee for the Allegheny Conference and a sustainability committee for Sustainable Pittsburgh, looking at how we can, as a business community in Pittsburgh, advance those goals. It's particularly important for me, both because of personal interest and commitment, but also because I do believe the electric industry has to be a part of the solution. We're part of the challenge. We have to be part of the solution in achieving those things. So we're going to keep working. I don't have anything specific for you on China or others, but I think under the sort of leadership broadly of the city and this community, it brings the whole business community together around that kind of goal.
So we have time for one more question. Any more questions? All right, then we actually are going to let you go a little bit early. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
I do want to make one mention of an important thing. So for the first time, we're actually doing through our hackathon during Energy Week. So Duquesne Light is providing us with data. So you all are actually one of the participants. So for those of you who are students who are interested in working on the hackathon, there's actually an opportunity to sort of dig into some of the data. And that's thanks to many of the folks on the Duquesne Light team that are here today.
Find me some solutions. I like it.
Yes, that's right. So with that, I want to say thank you very much to Steve Malnight. Thank you all for being here. Please make sure to grab your things and take them with you as you leave. And he'll be standing here for just a couple of minutes to ask any individual questions, but we do have pretty tight schedule, so we'll probably be moving him pretty quickly. So thank you all again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.